So hello and a very warm welcome to the first of many Business Traveller Middle East webinar sessions for 2021. My name is Gemma Greenwood and I'm the editor of Business Traveller Middle East, and today we're going to explore a hot topic: investment immigration to the United States. Here to tell us more about the opportunities is Shay Zamanian, a US licensed lawyer and migration specialist at the American Legal Center based in Dubai. The American Legal Center team are licensed lawyers and experts in the EB5 Permanent Residency Program, helping applicants from the GCC, Arab nations and other emerging markets. In essence, the program allows foreign nationals to invest in a government-approved commercial enterprise to receive a US green card and residency for themselves and their dependents. Shay, who is Managing Director at the American Legal Center, has vast experience working with families in the GCC and surrounding markets, helping them to obtain their US green card and residency via the EB5 Immigrant Investor Visa. Today, he's going to explain more about his role and that of the American Legal Center, as well as the EB5 program. Shay will also tell us more about the highly encouraging news that the EB5 investment price will soon decrease quite significantly, from $900,000 to just $500,000. So Shay, thank you for joining Business Traveller Middle East today. First of all, how are you?
How are you? I'm doing quite well. Thank you so much for having me here, Gemma.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and your experience in the industry?
Sure. So I've been working in the EB5 field for over a decade here in the Middle East, based out of Dubai. It's been about 8 years now. I've helped many families make it over to the US by way of this EB5 program, which is the fast track method for investors to move their families or gain access to the US by virtue of their investment. So it's been quite some time. Prior to coming to Dubai, I worked a part of the in-house legal team at the Lennar Corporation, which discussed more on the investment side of things, where we were essentially discussing these investment vehicles so that foreigners can invest and make their way to the US. After gaining some experience in the commercial real estate end of things in the US, I decided, why not? Let's go across seas and work a little bit with investors directly. So, this program is really at the intersection of commercial real estate law and immigration law. So thankfully, I've had the experience of being able to explore both sides.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I gave a very brief introduction to the EB5 program there. Can you tell us a little more in depth, an overview of this program and what it actually entails?
Sure. So this program was instituted by Congress about 30 years ago. Whereby what they envisioned was foreigners would invest into the US at about $1 million. And by virtue of their investment, create jobs in the US. So it would be a job creation program for the US economy. And by virtue of the job creation and investment, the investor would then be rewarded with a fast track to US residency. A lot has changed since then. So essentially, 2019, the program was raised to $900,000. Today, we're looking at a decreased amount at $500,000. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but the program itself, what it really implies is an investor with a clean source of funds whereby they would invest in a government pre-approved project in the US. Themselves, their spouse, and minor children under the ages of 21 can be included on the application. And we would essentially act as their guide and do the filing for them, deal with the local embassy, for example, here in Abu Dhabi. And we would be their first sort of resource in moving them along that path. They would invest for a series of 5 years. However, their benefits begin a little bit earlier. So they get their approval in about 1.5 years, where they are then US people. They have all the rights and privileges of being a US person, including education, healthcare, being able to work at private companies or starting their own company if they wish. So it's been quite successful here coming from the Middle East.
Great. So there's obviously quite a few benefits. I mean, what would you say were the real kind of USPs, the real standout benefits, if you could kind of sum those up?
Sure. I really want to spend a little bit of time speaking about education. I would say about 85% of my clients are doing this program for the future benefit and access for their children. And education is a hallmark here because it costs a lot for people to send their, children to the US for educational purposes. Tuitions are rising consistently in the US. The
Mm.
cost of having a child, in the US in terms of housing, books, transportation, all of that, it can certainly add up. Notwithstanding, when someone sends their kid to the US for education, ultimately that child wants to continue and be able to work, take on jobs at some of the big companies, for example, or research facilities, what have you. Unfortunately, as international students, they don't have that ability. And so after their education, they would have to return back from where they originated from. By virtue of doing this program and being proactive, and by virtue of your child and yourself becoming U.S. persons, you can have access to, the federal government will provide a bursary for the tuition, the housing, books, transportation, all the costs associated with sort of being a student in the U.S. Some of that will be through grants from the state and federal level, scholarships, and anything that grants and scholarships doesn't cover, you would have a 0% government subsidized loan. The US government has a policy of putting everyone on equal footing when it comes to education. So irrespective of parents can afford the education or not, that child would have access to a lot of benefits from the government in terms of their education. Aside from being able to save on tuitions and all that, that child is now ready to take on paid internships, be able to bolster their resume, and be in line to take on some of those best jobs upon graduation.
Mm.
And of course, because they're US people, they're eligible to work and stay in the US and sort of progress their lives in that way. So there's, a multitude of benefits of being a US person. But I definitely just wanted to spend a little bit of time speaking about education because it seems that a lot of my clients are geared towards that train of thought.
That's really interesting. I mean, what percentage would you say were education based in terms of the
I,
clients that you have? Because, yeah, be
It's
interested.
it's interesting. When I first meet a client, I think one of the first questions I ask is, "Tell me about your kids. How old are
Yeah.
they? Where are they looking to study?" To be honest, if it's for example a young male, uh, perhaps in his 30s, it may or may not be the best program for that person because
Mm.
there's a lot less value that perhaps they would unlock.
Mm.
But if it's a family, they've got dreams and aspirations of their kids going to the best schools in the US and getting set up in that way, I know that I can, bring a lot of value to the table and
Yeah.
explain to them. So I would say about 85%
Oh, wow.
of my clients are really geared towards the idea of building, multi-generational sort of decisions for their kids and their families.
Mm.
I mean, ultimately, if you know your kid's going to go to US based schools, they're going to want to stay there.
Yeah.
And, as the family unit, you don't want to really be apart from your family. So if your kids ultimately decide they want to stay and live and prosper in the US, at some given point, the whole family unit might actually
Mhm.
want to migrate over there together, or at least have the access by virtue of being a US person. They can come and go, um, you know, and have that access.
Yes. And I guess these days with, so much happening in terms of borders and, travel restrictions, that's even more of a benefit I would have thought because when you have a citizenship of a country, it's going to make it a lot easier, isn't it, in the future? So that kind of gives you peace of mind, I guess, too.
That's a really good point. I mean, with entrepreneurs that I meet, um, uh, busy men and women that are looking to expand their portfolios, buying an extra piece of real estate, for example,
Mm.
may or may not bring that much value to them. But being able to have access to greater health facilities,
Mm.
or travel options and all that,
Yeah.
really does bring value in
Yeah.
light of the pandemic and everything else.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it kind of sheds new light on it, really, doesn't it? So, so what are the requirements to actually participating in the program?
Sure. So the requirements are ultimately the U.S. government. It's more or less irrelevant to them whether you're your own business owner or whether you're a doctor at a hospital. They're not really looking in terms of your vocation, but what they're looking for is the clients that they take through this program. They're coming where their money can be proven up to be clear sources. So long as you can prove up a clear source of funds, be able to demonstrate the money that you're investing in the US, what the sources are of those funds, you should be able to get through. There were nationality requirements under the Trump administration. We had restrictions based on nationality, but thankfully, a lot of that has gone away now as we're entering into a new administration that's been a lot more open to immigration and just of all nationalities.
Okay. So, what about funding the cost of that investment? You mentioned about clean funds. Does that take into account funds obtained from a loan, for example?
So, for years, the US government didn't really like the idea of loans. And this sort of makes sense if you think about it. If someone is coming from abroad and they take a bank loan to undertake the program, the US government was wary whether after this person immigrates to the US, would they actually flatten their liens back home? Would they pay off their loans or would they just, kind of leave because ultimately they're leaving that country?
Yeah.
However, this year there has been a ruling in the federal courts that it basically, is a landmark case that said cash is cash. Ultimately, if you're investing into the U.S. economy, whether you take a loan, so long as we can sort of trace that, that loan came from a financial institution, um, you should be good to go. So that change in and of itself has driven a lot of demand.
Yeah.
People are now are able to take personal loans or unsecured loans to undertake this program, and many have been doing that.
Okay. Yeah, that would make a big difference for sure. And are you required to pay the money up front, or is there a payment plan where you pay in installments? How does that work?
Sure. So the program is premised upon investment. So you've got to prove up that you've made the investment for your approval to come through. From the time we start the program until the approval actually comes through, it's about a year and a half wait because it's not on a queue system. So you've got to wait your turn.
Hmm.
However, during that queue system or during that queue term where you're waiting for your approval to come through, there are payment plans available. For example, what we can do is, and I've done this many times and it's been successful across the board, where you would invest not the 500,000 upfront, you would invest 100,000 upfront. We would file your application just so that the government officer in Washington, D.C. is able to see that you have a bona fide interest in completing the program. And essentially, what happens is when your time comes up in queue, we would then prove up that you have invested the remainder of the amount. So,
Right.
long story short, there are payment plan options. So, you would do $100,000 now, file your application. Remainder would be due sometime later, perhaps a year later. That's depending on the project as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And what types of investment are on offer? Is it real estate, government bonds, for example? Are there options?
I wish government bonds would qualify or the purchase of real estate would qualify. Unfortunately, it doesn't. The reason for this is the purchase of real estate in and of itself is not a job creation investment. Remember, for each family that gets through, we've got to prove up that 10 new jobs have been created by virtue of this investment.
Right.
So unfortunately, it'd make my life easier and my clients would like it as well, but just purchasing real estate is not sufficient enough. It's got to be in a new commercial enterprise, meaning it's got to be pretty much in a new business
Okay.
that is up and going. For example, and there aren't strict limitations. For example, one of the Spider-Man movies, that qualified at some
Yeah.
point. But the thing is, I would say for startups or, abstract ideas, I generally don't um, recommend that my clients undertake those.
Hmm.
Generally, what we do is real estate construction development. And the
Right.
reason for that is there is value in collateral and, a way to really break down the numbers to find out the feasibility and the success of that project. Whereas a startup or some other idea that's sort of ramping up, we might not know the ultimate success of that
No,
project.
no, no, no.
My goal is to place a client into a project, get their green card quickly, and with the hope and expectation that they would get their full funds back.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's an investment, and we want that investment to be safe.
Well, that leads me on to my next question about return on investments. Normally, when you invest in something, you expect, or you do it with, the intention of hopefully getting some return. So you mentioned there about getting their money back. Is there anything on top of that, or how does it work?
Sure. So generally, with commercial real estate projects, they can potentially take on bank loans to complete their projects or what have you. What they do is they provide this offering where they buy, where they're doing government reporting and they've got a whole legal in-house team to prove up the job creation and what have you. And they're doing this for the simple, act of gaining access to cheap financing.
Yes.
So instead of them going to a bank and taking on a loan at 4 or 5%, for example, what they do is they take on foreign investors. The foreign investor doesn't get a very high return. They do get some returns, which sort of mitigates some of the fees that they've paid throughout the way. But ultimately, the investor is doing this whole exercise to be able to get their green cards quickly and with the hope and desire to get their funds back on time.
Yeah.
I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that.
Yeah.
There is a natural assumption that, in 5 years, the funds are guaranteed. In the world of EB5 or in the world of dealing with investment migration, the term guaranteed, that's not a term that can be just easily thrown around.
No.
When Congress instituted this program 30 years ago, they built it into the law and said, we want foreign investors to make a true investment in the US. And a true investment has a chance for gain and a risk for loss. So therefore, there can't be any written guarantees written in their investment. However, there are certain groups and there's not very many, I would say, there's perhaps a top 6 that we work with that have been in the industry for over a decade. They've completed all of their projects in the past, thousands of green cards issued, and they've repaid everyone back on time and in the full amount.
Yeah.
And they hope to keep that track record because they want to continue having access to cheap capital to continue their commercial development in the future. And so they're unlikely to break that reputation. So there is a lot of safety, there in the sense that there is a proven track record, and we can certainly help and try and mitigate and lower some of those risks for the client.
So in that respect, when you speak to clients, what do you tell them about the investment cycle and how long it's likely to be?
Sure. So it's, they should become eligible to receive their funds back in and around year 5.
Right.
They can't receive their funds back earlier, and there's a reason for that. When Congress instituted this program, what they were worried about is foreign investors would invest, quickly get their green cards or their US residency, and then once they claim their US residency, they would then take their money out of the US economy and send it back to the Middle East or China or what have you.
Yeah.
So we've got to prove up that the money had been invested for a series of years, and they met the requirements of the program, so that they can, after that requirement is met, they can then receive their funds back.
Yeah.
So all said and done, by the time we get these government approvals, you're looking at around year 5, and that's when you should become eligible and expect your funds back at that point.
Okay, great. And you touched upon it earlier about the change in US administration and how that had a positive impact. Could you tell us how it's made a good impact in the region that you cover in terms of EB5 program eligibility?
Absolutely. I've got great things to say about the current administration. I don't have fantastic things to say about the previous administration because a lot of their policies were sort of nationalistic, closing the borders,
Barriers.
not allowing foreigners to come in with the fear of, taking up too many US-based jobs or what have you.
Yeah.
So with the previous administration, under the Trump administration, there was a lot of errors that took place. One grave error that affected a lot of people in the Middle East was, of course, the elusive Muslim ban.
Yes.
Whereby, there was no rational basis to exclude certain nationalities from migrating to the US, but nevertheless, that was a rule for a series of years. So there's been a lot of pent-up demand whereby there have been certain nationalities that were looking to ultimately move to the US, but couldn't. But now that we've got our current administration under Biden, he had promised that within the first week or so, he would lift this, which appeared to be a racist ban. And he did. And so now we've got a lot of those nationalities coming through and applying through the program. We're happy to assist them in that regard. And that's been quite right. Another issue with the previous administration is, if you can recall, there was pretty much throughout the Trump administration, it was characterized by a lot of people getting hired and fired, and every day there was a new person that was coming into power.
Yeah, very much so.
And the problem with that, with so much movement, there was room for error. So there are certain positions within the US government where you can't just instill somebody in that position based on a whim. There are a nomination process whereby Congress must confirm, and there is power of succession where, based on hierarchy and seniority, certain positions would have to go to a specific person. Now, here's what happened. So under the Trump administration, as a lot of immigration was being restricted, they did restrict the EB5 program as well. They raised the investment amount from 500,000 to 900,000.
Right.
That was detrimental for the middle class. Remember, earlier on when we were discussing, this program is really meant to serve sort of that middle class family that's really looking for reach and access for their kids. So by virtue of raising the investment from 500,000 to 900,000, that entered into a whole different echelon of investors. And the program essentially froze because the people in the highest echelon don't really need this program ultimately. And when they did change the program from 500,000 to 900,000, it was under the acting secretary of Department of Homeland Security. His name was Kevin McAleenan. I'm sorry, I can't. McAleenan, there you go. And so under his direction, they raised the investment amount from 500,000 to 900,000. However, he was unlawfully serving as the acting secretary of DHS. There were other people in succession that should have taken his role. And because of that procedural error, this has been taken up in the federal courts in the US. And we should see a successful verdict whereby the judge will come down and say, based on procedure, they did not have the capacity in making these changes. They should have followed proper procedure. And because they didn't, those major rules that they've implemented that have affected immigration, those shall go away, allowing the current acting secretary of Department of Homeland Security, that being Alejandro Mayorkas, for him to ultimately then make a decision what he wants to do. And so we're hoping to get that verdict in the next 2 weeks. We are quite hopeful. We've been watching this case very closely, and we're hoping to see the decreased amount back to 500,000.
So it sounds like a real game changer. And what will be the impact in the Middle East region and your business?
Sure, there were a lot of people that are essentially, some are disgruntled, some are unhappy that they missed the opportunity. They had been thinking about doing the program for quite some time. When the price increase happened, they essentially got priced out. So by virtue of going back to 500,000, it's been a couple of years now. People have been giving it a lot of thought. And you're going to see a swarm of applications. There's going to be a reaction to the market, whereby you might see hundreds, if not thousands, of applications going in all at once. A lot of the better projects with these established groups that have a track record of repaying people back on time, those projects will become oversubscribed. So in the US, there will be a scramble in trying to create new offerings on one end. And abroad, the investors are going to scramble trying to find the correct project, and to file their application straight away.
Yeah.
For those that are considering the program, whether you decide to take on this program or not, one thing that I would recommend, and I tell all my prospective clients, is begin collecting your documents. No need to pay, any fees or sign any documents straight away. You're thinking about it. So while you're thinking about it, just save up your documents, because remember, this is on a queue system. So if you wait too late and, it's a reactionary sort of movement in filing, you're going in with hundreds, if not thousands, of other applications. By virtue of collecting your documents and being ready, you can then capitalize and skip the queue by many, many months.
Yeah, yeah.
So
it sounds like you're going to be really busy. How long do you think the 500,000 price will last for? Is this going to be permanent?
Okay, so the current administration under Joe Biden, the acting secretary for Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, who has been, implementing different rules for immigration currently, he's actually ratified the $900,000 rule. They didn't really want to put up the fight in terms of, should we take it down to 500,000 or not? He's essentially said, we've got bigger things to worry about. We're fine with leaving it at 900,000. Notwithstanding, the judge still believes, based on, we believe that the judge will agree that based on procedure, nevertheless, the rule shouldn't have been changed from 500 to 900,000. Therefore, even if we go back to 500,000, we fall back on the default rules. We've been given explicit, confirmation that the current administration is actually okay with 900,000. Therefore, there might be just a short window of opportunity. We don't know how big that opportunity will be. That window might be a few weeks, a few months. We don't know. But if you're considering the program, why not get in at 500,000, secure your rights at 500,000, than to just risk and wait, because at some given point, it will go up again. It must, because, in terms of inflation and a lot of other market factors, it's not going to remain at 500,000. So we'll see. We'll see when it will go up. It will eventually go up again.
So I guess there must have been people that filed for the program at an investment of 900 and now it's going to go to 500. What happens if they're stuck in that process? Will they still have to pay the 900 or the 500, or does it depend on what stage they're at?
That's such a great question. So not only will we get a ruling based on whether we roll back to 500,000, but hopefully we'll get a little bit of guidance as well. For those that have filed their application at $900,000, they would have to speak to their current counsel, their lawyers, and the project that they invested in. If they choose to, I would presume they can refile their application at 500,000 and see if they can get back a refund from the project that they invested in. So those are people that have previously applied. For people today, if you file your application when the rule is at 500,000, you secure your rights at that lower amount.
Right.
So even if the price is increased at a later stage, which it will be, you will not be required, based on the contract clause of the US Constitution and based on your settled expectations, they're not going to come back. The US government will not come back and ask you for more.
Yeah.
It's congratulations, you secured your rights at that 500,000.
So it's a bit like when you're looking for a fixed mortgage, you've signed at that rate and that's what you're getting.
There you go.
I don't think we get many fixed mortgages these days, but we can hope. Coming on to another topic, I understand that Indian retrogression has been a concern. Can you tell us a bit about what that is and its current status?
Sure. So this Indian retrogression, this has been a topic that's been thrown around quite loosely. Everyone has their own sort of take on it. It's really this idea that if too many nationalities, or if too many people from a certain nationality have been applying to the program, there should be some, visa cap. So ultimately, there's a 7% visa cap per nationality. And for example, China is affected. A lot of these applications have been being driven from China. because there's such a great demand from, mainland China for people to gain access to the US. Uh, there have there has been a lot of demand coming from Indian nationalities as well. There had been talks that ultimately Indian nationalities would be affected, and their applications would take many, many years or months to then be processed because there would be a limited supply of visas for that nationality. This has not been in reality. This has not come to light yet. So, uh, you know, is it possible that in the future this might be a case? It could, but currently, as it stands right now, if an Indian national wants to apply, they're not going to be discriminated based on their nationality. There's plenty of visas currently to go around.
Yeah.
A couple of years from now, if we remain at 500,000 and a lot of people are filing from India, that could be the case. Today, it is not.
So really, it's
So
another
we're good
case
to
of
go.
getting now while you can, really, at a good price, and while there are no caps in place.
Exactly. And a wonderful administration that's been open to all nationalities and will hopefully expedite the process for everybody.
Yeah, great. So finally, we've covered so many topics there. What is your plan for rolling out the EB5 in this market, and why is now the best time to invest?
So we've got a lot of initiatives. I actually love doing, in-person conferences and seminars whereby I just educate the market. I love sort of discussing the program, teaching families what it's about, how they can ultimately capitalize and better their futures. It's been quite difficult understanding the pandemic. With that said, we've got a string of events, live events, starting in the month of June, which is next month. And I'll be back at it. So we'd have conferences where we educate the public, we invite them in. I would give a presentation to a group open to open discussions, question and answers, all that good stuff. I also make myself available out of our offices in downtown Dubai for one-on-one meetings. That's also available, but we've really ramped up marketing because we do believe that this is a worthwhile program, especially for residents within the GCC. Within the Middle East, it's an interesting dynamic here because ultimately you've got a lot of families, a lot of expats in Dubai. It's, over 70% of the population are expats.
Mm.
They come here, it's a stepping stone. They build a wonderful family or a wonderful sort of livelihood for themselves, but ultimately they can't stay here. And, retirement is not really, it's not commonplace here. A lot of people end up having to go back to India or Syria or wherever they ultimately had originated from. So it's a pertinent discussion here in the Middle East for countries like Saudi, UAE, because you've got this robust expat community that's looking for their next step, that's looking to finally have a place where they can gain a nationality and sort of settle the kids. And so, we're going to be quite excited to spread the news. And we're going to be starting doing that next month with live events.
Brilliant. And I guess really just to close off our conversation, is there any key message that you'd like to get out there? If you could say one thing about this program and what you do, what would it be?
I mean, I think we've already touched on this, but sincerely, a lot of people had missed the opportunity when the price increase happened to 900,000. Contact us. Let us tell you what documents to begin collecting. Collect those documents, have it ready on hand, just so that if you choose to, you can sort of expedite your process and get in queue quicker and faster. So we're a team of US licensed lawyers here at the American Legal Center. We're happy to have free consultations with you in person over Zoom. And everyone's got a different case. Everyone's got a different story. We are just so happy to be able to connect with you and find out what your goals are and how we can help you get there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Shay, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to Business
Gemma,
Traveller.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you so
Really
much.
great. I'm really sure this conversation has sparked a lot of interest in the programme, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about your progress in the future. So I hope you'll come back and join us again soon. Just want to say, ladies and gentlemen watching this webinar, thank you for joining us here at Business Traveller Middle East today, and for joining Shay Zamanian, who's the Managing Director at the American Legal Centre in Dubai. We look forward to bringing you more business webinars to you very soon. Until then, stay safe and stay well. Thank you very much.
Take care.